Hey everyone, thanks for joining us today. My name is Ron Dawson. I'm the founder and president of ePestSupply and ePestControl.com. Our special guest today is Mr. Ken Kupfer of AntPro. Ken is a co-founder and co-inventor of the AntPro system. This webinar focuses on using the AntPro system along with some advanced baiting techniques to help you get control of Argentine ants, specifically in California. If you're invited to attend this seminar or the webinar, it's because you are located in California, where the Argentine ant is the #1 ant pest. Ken and I met about 17 years ago, and I've always believed that chemical pesticides have their place. But when the safer and more effective alternatives are available, we should explore those first. 17 years ago, the AntPro system was unlike anything I'd ever seen, and what's interesting is that it hasn't changed. It's a system so simple, it doesn't need much improvement. However, due to its simplicity, getting it to work against all the different ant species can take some experimenting and fine-tuning. That's why since the beginning, ePestSupply has been the online seller of AntPro dispensers. You won't find them on Amazon or eBay or any other online store. ePest has been the preferred online source for dispensers, liquid bait, and also technical support for years. So here's the outline for today's webinar. It's a short half-hour presentation, and then we'll open up a question and answer segment for about 15 minutes. If you have specific questions, click on the Q&A button on your screen and type it in. Due to time constraints, we might not be able to get to every question, but if we don't get to yours, feel free to email me or Ken, and we'll help you. When this webinar is over, we'll have a special discount code just for you if you need additional AntPros or additional liquid bait. So without any further delay, let me introduce Mr. Ken Kupfer of AntPro. Take it away, Ken.
Thank you. By the way, a lot of times when people have ant issues, it's better to just, you'll see on all my paperwork, because the list that we work from is, most of you out there, we believe, have the system. So this has been to really give you a little more information on it. But not only that, sometimes when you have a question, it leads to a second question after I answer the first question. So on all the paperwork that you receive with the AntPro system, my name and phone number is on just about every document we send out. You're always welcome to phone me. Just realize that when I'm not in California, which is not at all this year, I'm 3 hours ahead of you. So try and get me early in your day, and we'll be sure to connect, but I'll always phone you back. So I'm going to set up the share screen now, and we'll take a little journey. So, okay, let's get into slideshow, and come on, slideshow. From the beginning. That was a lot smoother. Okay, so California has approximately 270 named species of ants. Of those 270 named species, there's probably 35 or 40 that are what we call bad actors. Now, in the case of the Argentine ant was first seen in Southern California and in citrus groves and in urban environments, but more so in agriculture initially, as I understand it. Ant came into New Orleans from South America. Now, in South America, this ant has completely different traits and habits than it would have when it moved out. The Argentine ant is the #1 actual invasive ant on the planet. There's a list and a database of the 100 most invasive life forms on the planet, with such notorious characters as Aedes albopictus, which is the tiger mosquito, and even the worst type of water hyacinth. There's 5 ants on the 100 most invasive list, and of those 5 ants, the Argentine ant is by far the most invasive. It's called the tramp ant because back in the old days, they would be tramp steamers and tramp ships, and they would get on board the ships. But now they travel in other ways. But the difference is when when superorganism ants, such as the Argentine ant, move out of their normal competing environment, they tend to change the ones that survive and thrive in the new environment and become, in this case, unicolonial, which means you can take Argentine ants from Hawaii and introduce them to ants in California, and they'll take them right in like long lost colony members. And the same thing applies to Argentine ants in Georgia or Argentine ants in the Mediterranean. So this image is up there showing a nest that I broke open some years back, because showing the actual complete metamorphosis of this insect, I have to get someone to approve me taking an illustration. But this is a nest broken open, and you can see the eggs down at the bottom. Ants grow from an egg to a larvae through a pupae stage, and basically like opening a Ziploc bag, they come out as adults and have specific jobs to do. One of the unique things about the Argentine ant, when it did become a world-class tramp invasive, is that it went up to multiple queen status of having an average of 15 queens per 1,000 ants. So that's a lot of ants being reproduced and brought into this world. So moving along. So that's basically the hot points around the planet, and especially in the Mediterranean. There was an incident, now probably 12, 14 years ago, that little diagram came from, where they actually had a chain of ants, some 3,700 miles long, that were all very active at one time and sort of semi-connected to each other. In California, beginning back in 2004, I started plotting the hot places where the most activity of the Argentine ants were, and that's what you see with the green dots on it. Now, that doesn't mean they're not in other locations, but you're not going to find them active out, let's say, by the Salton Sea in the desert. You're going to find Formica purpulosa, which is a highly superorganism ant that's considered to be native to that area, but it's pretty much the top dog, if you want to call it that. But the numbers of these ants, let's say in Southern California, would basically run somewhere in the neighborhood on average of about 250 million ants per acre. Now, what we're talking about is not in their outrageous numbers. I've been involved in research counts where we've had them well over 500 million ants per acre in citrus and in some urban environments. So here's the AntPro dispenser. It's designed to hold a tremendous amount of liquid bait in proportion, approximately 19 ounces. And the only time it will actually feed bait with 360-degree access for the ants is when the ants actually trigger the release of the bait into the pool area. So it's what we call target specific. It's not allowing other insects to feed other than earwigs, roaches, and a few other characters that it's actually used for on islands and in other environments. But it's also used for German roaches and American roaches. And with it is a product called Gourmet Liquid Ant Bait, which was tested back, in the very beginning, which contains both amino acids and carbohydrates, which works for a wide variety of ants, because we got 14,000 named species and about 20,000 believed to be on the planet. So, and you can see the stake that locks it down into the ground. But the AntPro dispensers that have been out there since 2003 are still out there doing their job, most of them. So they're very rugged and reliable. Now, the Gourmet Liquid Ant Bait name changed about 3 or 4 years ago to Greenway Liquid Ant Bait, but you can see there's no difference in the appearance of the bottle. Gourmet still exists, but it exists for agriculture and is sold in volume. We have the proprietary rights to the Gourmet for agriculture, and Innovative Pest Control owns it and creates both for the urban pest control market. You can also see that it's safe compared to most insecticides, but when it's inside an AntPro dispenser, it's safe for everyone. We do ranches and all kinds of environments with animals, including national parks. So here's a brief little video of what happens. And in this particular instance, this particular dispenser was on a 5-acre plot of land here in Florida. There was a future farmer site that there were over 1 billion Argentine ants per acre, literally. And even as tiny as they can be, that's still a number that there's no place you can stand or walk. What happened was, as the rains came, the ants were pushed up to higher ground. And they were also put into conflict with another superorganism ant. And at the time, they just wiped out the other ant. It was actually prior to their moving in greater numbers. You can see the ants are actually climbing on each other's backs, and they have 360-degree access to the dispenser. When the ants aren't active, there's no liquid in the base of the dispenser. It's contained in a vacuum and protected. So here's just some brief information about its uniqueness, but I just went into it. The main thing is it's target specific. We're not killing the 99 good insects to get at the bad insects. We're dealing with global issues now, but one of the issues is it takes several billion ants and other small insects for one small mammal to exist. So we need them as much as they need us. Now, there are particular insects that get out of control that we have to get under control so that we have our crops and so that we're not having sanitary issue in our homes and around our properties. But we need to be more target specific in what we do. This is another superorganism ant a few years back. This is the one that the Argentine ant defeated, by the way, at that future farmer site. Then we at KM took out the Argentine ant successfully. The tawny crazy ant was originally called the Caribbean crazy ant. And this particular ant, well, I wanted to show you a video, but for time purposes, that pile of dead ants down in the bottom right-hand corner is 30 inches from the outside of it to where it actually reaches the wall, and probably a half-inch thick at one point. That's ants dying from natural causes because this ant goes out of control and literally has 40 to 60 queens per 1,000 ants at certain times for like 8-year cycles. And when they overflow properties, it's an incredible event. There were some concerns out at the University of California, which I've done past research with, of this ant becoming a problem in California. But the Argentine ant isn't going to let it get to first base. I'm comfortable with that one. And then they'll say, oh yeah, Ken made the call on that one. This particular ant is attacking, but now we've got it under control. That's the Jacksonville Zoo and Horticultural Gardens. And we had up to 4 million entering the zoo daily. So you can see that we actually stopped them by putting up a perimeter, and there's actually hoses connecting the dispensers. So a lot of times when you're dealing with issues, when you connect the dispensers, you're actually turning the ants left and right, and they're creating recruitment trails for the other foragers to follow them. So there's a lot of little tricks that can be employed in management situations that even get you more bang for your buck. So this is a little history. I put this in there because Dr. John Klutz at the top and Moss were the ones who came up with the basic beginning information. And I worked with Dr. Klutz on several University of California research projects with other entomologists back in 2005 through 2011. And AntPro was still involved in a lot of research projects, but they were with the USDA then. And Dr. Klutz was really my mentor and gave support to Bob and myself with the research and documenting that we could do this without destroying other insects. And we've now created other methodologies for doing mosquitoes, Asian citrus psyllids, and others. by manipulating them by using their own language and ability, what we call insect cues, but that's for another day. So this is Napa Valley. We started up there in 2004 and tested all the various baits. And as I mentioned, Greenway, just incredible bait because it contains amino acids and carbohydrates. You want ants to feed full-time, not just part-time. And the important thing is to depopulate as efficiently and quickly as possible. And we're going to get into the urban end of this, and I'm going to describe some situations. And as I said, as some of you already know, I'm as far as the phone or an email. Over here, this lady up in the top left-hand corner, let me get my mouse up here. That is an Argentine ant queen. And I mentioned there's an average of 15 queens per 1,000. These ants got up on a table in a garage, and the foraging queens actually leave the nest with several hundred to several thousand workers in tow. So when Argentine ants move out and spread and divide their nests, they're actually creating other nests instantly, because in the normal process of reproduction, a queen will fly from the nest, an A-late, and what's going to happen is they're going to have a nuptial flight, mate with the males, and land in the ground and do the ultimate Scarsdale diet. And that is literally they use their interior muscle mass to regurgitate and feed the first few eggs that they create. And now they've created the first few ants that are going to protect her, help her raise the brood, and actually she's just going to lay eggs, and others are going to go out and forage. With the Argentine ant, up as many as 15% will go out and forage, which is a lot, but on average you're talking 5 to 7%. So you rarely see the ants in their greater numbers, although I'm sure a lot of you would say you're living on top of a giant ant mound, because I've had that story pretty solid for numerous years. Here again, this is in my laboratory in my garage. I kept the Argentines in there for 26 months, continuously living and going between tanks. That's a traveling queen trying to bud the nest in the middle of the night. And you can see the ant with a pupae casing trying to go behind her. Sometimes the hoses would plug up when they're trying to move the nest. So, okay, so what is their purpose in life? They're farmers. They're thieves sometimes, but they're primarily farmers. And their biggest conflict with us is they take care of the homopteran insects, what we call the true bugs. These are the insects that pierce and suck fluids out of plants, such as citrus, stone fruit, all kinds of different forms of ornamentals, but numerous kinds of crops, and create honeydew, which the ants take from them. So the ants literally farm 32,000 different species of true bugs that are disease vectoring insects. So here's an image of pollinators. We always think of pollinators as being honeybee, and you can see the one to the right, and there's a beautiful big bumblebee. The ants even fight them off from the plants because they think they're going to eat the insects. So when you think in terms of rabbits and forms of insects, animals that are feeding out in the environment, which are fairly large mammals, we're huge. Whales are gigantic. They're protecting the food that they're farming or the cattle that they're raising, depending on which species they are. And in the case in your state, you're now fending off the Hulong Bing or citrus greening disease, which is carried by the Asian citrus psyllid, which I am going to be doing a webinar on that soon. We've done several years of research, and I have 13 citrus trees that do not have any insecticides, predatory insects, that there are numerous kinds that are being destroyed by all of the different types of chemicals that are being used. Presently, very strongly, the neonicotinoids replace the organophosphates. But we've got a situation. We need more of the the predatory insects like this young lady down here, which is a ladybug larvae. And I debated about showing this to you, but I'm not showing you the really nasty stuff. But it's sort of like eating potato chips for them. She's knocking off and eating aphids. And so the aphids aren't able to pierce and draw the fluids out of the plants and weaken them and vector diseases to them. Same thing applies with various mealybugs. There's various diseases that they're fighting off in crops, whether it be grapes, stone fruit, other things. It's an ongoing battle that we just don't notice around us. Sometimes you kind of have to get a bug eye to watch what's going on in nature around you. But the basic reality is your yard, your piece of property is a small little ecosystem. And it's important to know the difference between the insects that we need to keep out there doing the job for us, because there's always some form of resistance built up to the insecticides, but there's no resistance to being eaten. So keep that as we move on, because it's really important. So this goes back to 2006 when we did the first organic citrus and had a 70% reduction within 2 weeks of the Argentine ants. And I mean 500 million per acre in citrus in the Fallbrook Escondido area, and an 80% reduction in 3 weeks. And there's controls and methodologies we've developed to cost effectively depopulate the ants, get the predators in the game, and have them do the work in the groves and in the row crops and other things. But again, that's a subject for another day. And you'll see Dr. John Klutz and Les Greenberg and Dr. Mike Rust there. I later became a researcher with them on the urban projects. This is how we deploy in a citrus grove. But the reason this image is up there, ants are not attracted to anything. They're random but continuous foragers. So they randomly forage, and when they find something, they create a recruitment pheromone trail directly back to the nest. And that's the key. They recruit other ants and give them samples as they go back to the nest. These Argentine ants going in two ways. You'll notice that the ants here, where I'm putting the cursor around, their abdomens are extended. They have a social stomach that holds up to enough liquid to feed 12 other ants. On average, they make it back to the nest with about enough liquid to feed 9 other ants. And of course, we're a Trojan horse methodology. They take it back. Their primary responsibility is to feed the Royal Highnesses and knock them out of the game. And so they do that through a process called trophallaxis, which is regurgitating and feeding the other ants. They can't feed on solids. They have to break the solids down, feed them to the larvae, and the larvae mix them into a liquid and then regurgitate it. And it's a long way around the block and not practical. So you can see the ant approaching from the left. Its abdomen isn't full, and it's about to make contact with that ant. That ant's going to give it a little sample, and it's going to reinforce that recruitment trail to wherever they're feeding. The biggest thing around your yards and your homes is irrigation. Argentine ants are water ants, okay? And I mentioned about connecting things together with lines and hoses. When you have really bad situations, the ants will actually go left and right when they connect on smooth running mediums of travel. So this was given to me by a farmer in Riverside, but you can see the ant up in the back of the fruit working on mealybugs. So this is the first publication of the Green Bulletin by the University of California in 2010. And back then, all the AntPros were showing up blue because they were aqua, but the UV filtering that protects the bait so that the bait doesn't go bad. And I haven't found a date on the Greenway liquid ant bait. We used to say, make sure you change it out within a 6-month cycle. But basically, when you do add bait, you should be replenishing. And a lot of people ask me, even though I write about it, when I install the dispenser, there's no way to see how much bait is in it. Well, you don't want to hold it up to the sun to see the level. You want to leave it in place. Tap the dispenser with a screwdriver handle that you're going to use to make the pilot hole that I mentioned in the instructions. You'll get a hollow thunk. The biggest thing is this time of year, your population is at its peak. You've just reached it. Now the ants are going to retract back into larger nests, but they're still going to be there. And this is when you really want to bait more. It's more difficult when you've got a population that's multiplied up from March on to the end of September and early October. You're dealing with destroying huge numbers of ants. To have your units deployed during the winter months in non-freeze zones, you see less day ants, but they're foraging during the daytime, and the ants are going back and feeding the ants that are now in much larger nests, but they're not as active. But they're getting ready to cull the old queens, and they're creating a batch of new queens. And we can get into this, but there's just not the time. By early spring, you've got young queens that are able to take thousands of ant workers and create instant nests. That's the key. That, along with being unicolonial and not fighting with each other. So here are the basic instructions. On all of the instructions, you see my personal email, and you also see my phone number. Yeah, I'm here to help you, but it's also because you help your neighbor. It's all about passing the information on, about being target specific and not destroying the good bugs. And one of the things we do is we help you identify what's going on, and so that you're not just broadcast killing the insects that are part of our future and our grandchildren's. And I can't speak any more strongly about, well, yes, I can. Got to start paying attention to what's going on around us, not just global warming, etc. And there's no time for that, but I'm here for you to help you. One of the things is dilute your bait 1-to-1, but use distilled or bottled water. Don't use water out of the tap. And for questions, we can go into the Q&A on that, but basically the bait's in a vacuum. It's protected. It's got UV filtering. And to just moving along, I'm going to move a little bit faster. The math works like this. For every 3,300 ants that are feeding, they're feeding an average of 9 other ants per trip, and they're living for about 40 to 50 hours. So it's depending on the distance of the nest, they're making several trips before they become lethargic and start to die. But the reason that they keep feeding is because they don't know what we're doing to them. They don't understand the Trojan horse, and they don't get the connection. So 3,300 ants are feeding 29,700 ants. So when you take 19 ounces, that's about 16 million ants. But when you look at the number of ants per acre that you're dealing with and per a lot, you're just not going to deal with it. This is an ant feeding on a drop about the density of salt water. See how it's almost like pulling on a rubber band. They have to get that liquid down their esophagus and back into that social stomach. That's why these thicker gels and things, they're not going to work as effectively with the Argentine. Okay, we're going to move a little bit faster because I want to get into the urban. Okay, this is almost a zero lot neighborhood. And in this particular neighborhood, it's averaging 2.9 dispensers per house because there's literally no yards to deal with. So it takes less to protect than they're protecting as a community. In this case, this is a new community that's just beginning, and there's a couple families that moved in the end and a couple families down at the other end, and the ants aren't in the houses yet. So what the pest control operator is doing is creating a line, and this line is actually under this fenced walkway. That's a wood walkway that's raised 10 inches. And so the ants are connected like with the hoses and creating a barrier and depopulating the ants before they can get into the neighborhood. Then as the people move in, they can decide how they're going to deal with it. The circle you're looking at is the averaging foraging range of an Argentine ant worker, which is kind of incredible. It's about 200 feet. So that's half of the 200 feet, a little over half, I think. So the radius, that's the 200 feet. Yeah, now I remember what I did. Okay, now here's a home where the person has a crawl. I couldn't use California homes because, number one, I need to get the approval of the homeowners, but I used homes with Argentine ant issues and people who consented. So these particular ants, they're starting up against the house like I show in the installation and operation. But what I recommend when you can is a two-step. The ants are under the eaves and in the shade. Shade is important. Ants do not feed in the sun. Keep that in mind. The less hours in the sun, the more hours of impact you're going to have on that population. Now, one of the things is, because of their foraging range, you're creating overlapping kill zones that are huge. So when you can, if you've got superorganism populations around you, take the second step once you get them out from the interior wall voids of the house and under the house in this case, and move your units out farther once you're at that point and bait in the shade. When the ant population is diminished, the units will go in a dormant mode and they'll act as sentinels. They'll actually only be activated when the ants trigger them. So when ants are trying to move in, they're taking the bait way farther out and the ants aren't getting back to you in greater populations. So that's why you have to have a strategy when you're dealing with a superorganism species. So the next home I was looking for was similar to being, cut that out. Okay, touchy mouse. Go back to my current thing. I lived in a home like this for the first years of my life. I was a post-war baby, and my parents kept building rooms on the house. The yard gets smaller and smaller. You'll see there's a unit, the green dot, deployed in the shade up by the front of the driveway. The other one over here is actually supposed to be just under in the shade, under the fascia of the house. Then you can see we're in a bush over here. I have to show them to you, but the idea is when people say to me, I have got a place that's shady at that side of the house, you can create shade, and we can show you ways of doing it very easily. But you're going to find the ants are using the fences just like those hose lines I mentioned. In this case, yellow represents a floater. Having a floater is one you can move to hot points. In this case, you got an easement with a lot of trees and ant populations here that you're reaching out and depopulating to stop them from coming in where you don't have that much space to deal with them. So moving along, again, this is a two-step process. Starting at the house because this guy's getting invaded, but also when you can, deploying out farther because the ants inside that circle, unlike Custer's Last Stand, are going to come out to feed and destroy themselves. Okay? So anyone who has questions on that, please ask them, because what you're doing is you're first stopping the ones that are coming in and depopulating the ones that are in the wall voids of the house. One of the things, there's a lot of stucco on frame in California. And when you do finally get rains, the ants move to higher ground. But the other thing is irrigation. There's a lot of watering going on. And with that watering, do it early in the morning so the sun dries it off as the day goes on. But limit it to what you need to keep the plants healthy, because when the irrigation is on by the house, it's an open invitation. That's why I always say put a unit by the drip area from the air conditioner. Okay, here's a more complicated scenario, and I need a swig of water. This particular situation, the house has a courtyard, major invasion of ants, and so what you're looking at is a strategy that I did on Google Earth with the end user to help them get a strategy that was going to work to depopulate around their home. But you can see to the north, down to the south, is a property that doesn't have irrigation. To the north, the property does. So here is where we eventually move to utilize this fence, 1, 2, 3, to have them go left and right and feed and go back to their nests to stop as we lower the population inside. Here's a community situation where people go out to the pool, they spill their pina colada, the ants come, enjoy themselves, get drunk. I don't know if they get drunk, but it's a deployment around an urban clubhouse area. But we do a lot of these. That one's in Atlanta. We do the same with a lot of the gardens, the community gardens. I think I have around 25 of them. And we also work with the master gardeners in different counties on different problems that they're having. We do whatever we can to contribute to their strategies, and we learn from them as we go. There's an exchange from you when you communicate with me. I learn and I pass it forward. So in this case, this turns out to be a very easy one because it's almost a 1, 2, 3 because of the kind of fence that's there. And you're looking at 130 feet, about 70 feet apart on the dispensers. So the truth is, when you're dealing with Argentine or the tawny or the Caribbean or any of these superorganism ant species, like in the Pacific right now, I'm doing the yellow crazy ant with UNESCO to protect the Coco de Mer forest in the Seychelles. There's always a different strategy that needs to be employed. In many cases, you see the way they flow. I always get calls about people where they put their trash out. Well, that's something you need to look at, and also think in terms of repelling borders. 50% vinegar and water in a mister, shake it and mist around something will repel the ants for the limited time you have those receptacles out there to get them taken away. This is basically it. That is another way, taking the plant pots and creating covers, getting spray paint at the cheapest stuff you can get at Wally World, and doing a light pastel so that the sun reflects will help you put units in areas where you know that you're getting invaded at certain times in the night and so forth. Down below is a strawberry field, and you can see the white containers because the ants were actually picking the seeds out of the strawberries and destroying beautiful organic strawberries at this organic strawberry farm, which is a farmer who taught me a lot some 19 and 18 years ago. So we'll move on, and the next is just fire ants.
Hey everyone.